Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dualistic Unity movie review series. I am recognizing the absurdity, but realizing that I can do it with a bit of a softer touch. I think initially when you start recognizing just how fucking ridiculous some of the shit we do is, there can be a aggressive, frustrated undertone. And I've kind of been realizing how, as much as that may be the initial feeling that I feel, doesn't quite have the impact as compassion and understanding for people's fragility does. And telling them how fragile they are also doesn't always help that. So gonna probably, I don't know. I've shifted into a bit of a softer touch with things, especially on videos relative to last year. And I think I'm just gonna continue that because I'm realizing that the aggression doesn't quite have the same impact that compassion may.
And that is why I do not believe in human nature or the idea of human nature, because regardless of who you are, depending on how you act, that is how you are going to perceive human nature. And it's simply because you want to justify how you act. Everybody must act this way. And the reason I bring that up is because today's movie review is actually about the Planet of the Apes, and not the new version, not the shitty 90s version, but the original movie from 1968 that starred Charlton Heston, Roddy McDowall, Kim Hunter, and Maurice Evans as Dr. Zaius. This movie's amazing. I love this movie because it's not about the special effects. In fact, within about 10 to 15 minutes of watching the movie, you have to quickly let your brain just set aside the fact that they are, in fact, wearing rubber masks and riding around on horseback dressed as gorillas. You have to let the need for CGI go. And what you find is a story that is compelling and has a lot to say about humanity and the reason that we do the things that we do. And largely it's because we are biased. We are biased in our need to see our own superiority over everything else. And because of that, we stick to what we know, we judge what we do not know, and we live in this collective little bubble, not understanding exactly how destructive we are or how self-destructive we are. And so this movie is brilliant. And I think people really miss out in focusing on the newer CGI, the newer animation, the newer graphics, and all of that, and missing out on the storyline that was really trying to be brought across in the original. So I'm glad I had a chance to share this with you, Andrew. I'm very curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, and just a reminder, spoilers. Gonna be lots of spoilers here. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Well worth the watch. But yeah, I think overarching, it's just funny to see how they basically just replaced humanity with ape manity, and it's like the same thing going on. Like it's just a reflection of all the dumb fucking bullshit that we hold on to and believe in and hold tightly. And there were even scenes like cognitive dissonance was expressed by apes literally closing their ears to things. One of the funniest parts. I laughed out loud at that. But
Actually, I'd like to point out very quickly that if you go back to that scene where you see the three apes sitting next to each other in the hearing, what you'll actually see is one of them close their ears, another one close their eyes, and another one close their mouth, which is hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil.
oh shit. Oh man. I missed that one. But yeah, I was just laughing at how they're all just like not paying attention basically to what's being said and actively avoiding something that may show them something new or shift the way that they're thinking about things. So I don't know if we want to stick to like a sort of chronological order to this at all, but I guess kicking things off just with the beginning and them flying through space, because I found Charlton Heston or Taylor's initial kind of spiel to be interesting because it was symbolic of literally taking a zoomed out approach to humanity And what he was talking about was just how silly war seems from space, like how silly so many of the things that we do seem when you're hurtling through space at light speed. And one of the things he said is just like how silly war seems, and how from space, like that perspective really squashes one's ego, right? Especially, they're going through like on Earth years. I think they traveled for like 2,000 years essentially on Earth years, which is funny saying now after seeing the whole thing, because you realize, and again, spoilers, that they were on Earth the whole fucking time. So just kicking things off with that perspective, and then uh, Taylor's view as they land, and just kind of that what's his name, Landon, yeah, is kind of representative of the ego, and Taylor is just, it seems like he's kind of being a dick to Landon, but to me he was just kind of pointing out the absurdity of Landon's desire, his desire to live forever, his desire to be immortalized. It's very much from the egotistical perspective, whereas Taylor had much more of a reasonable approach, in my opinion. But to someone who's bought in to Landon's perspective, they'll see Taylor as being kind of a dick as they're walking through, as he's just laughing his ass off at him putting up his little American flag in the sand. He just like has a wicked laugh. And I was laughing too, because I'm like, oh, this dude's still holding on to this perspective that like peak United States is the peak society, and meanwhile they've traveled through space for thousands of years, and it's just very, very silly from that perspective, from a zoomed out perspective, so many of the things that we do on Earth.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoy Taylor's character, because at one point when he's going through that early monologue and he's recording his thoughts, and he's talking about, I wonder what man will be like when we get there, with so much time having passed, and I wrote this down. Does man still wage war against his brother? Does he keep his neighbor's children starving? Which is a very accurate summary of what we do currently on this planet. And then later on, talking to Landon and laughing at Landon's expense, for sure, because that's why Landon was the one having the greatest issue with what was going on. He was trying to hold on to everything that he knew. So the idea of an uncertain future was not something that he can reconcile. Even the idea of how much time had passed, he's like, well, you don't know that. He's like, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. And it was kind of a funny conversation, but I like when Taylor said what his reasoning was to be on this adventure at all. There's got to be something better than what we've been doing. There's got to be something better than man. There's got to be. And I loved the enthusiasm with which he said that.
Yeah, and that, I think that kind of reminds me of, I was talking about this on one of our either Patreon or one of our episodes yesterday, just that perspective that just because we perceive current society as the best we've done doesn't mean it's the best we can do. And that's kind of reflected in the apes throughout the movie. Like they've just kind of settled upon their what do they call it? Articles of faith. They're like always just pointing to the articles of faith as opposed to looking at reality, looking for themselves. They're relying upon some shit that someone wrote a bunch of years ago, very reflective of the Bible. And people just point to that, look at that. And it's like, no, look at reality for what it is. And so I think Taylor's take on that there must be something out there better than what we're doing, bigger than man, more than what we know. And that's kind of the mentality that we're taking in general, like dualistic unity takes in general. It's like we don't necessarily know what the answer to the shit going on now is, but we've recognized that there's a bunch of shit going on, and we're curious about what could come of a shift in mentality. There's the recognition that we could do better, and we don't have to settle upon just what we've always done to do so. And so that's obviously reflected throughout the movie with the apes holding on to what they know
at the expense of learning anything else. And you see it repeatedly. For example, with the paper plane. Dr. Zayas didn't even try. He didn't in any way entertain the idea that it could fly. He just crumpled it up because the alternative would threaten everything that they had become comfortable with, which was ultimately the idea that apes are superior. And that's what we're doing all the time. We're always looking at humanity as we are currently being expressed, being the pinnacle. And so anything that undercuts that is immediately a threat. And I'm reminded of Graham Hancock when I say this right now, because he's currently introducing all of these alternative theories about the pyramids, what happened in the Amazon, a lot of these older civilizations and what may have come before them, that there may have been civilizations that predate our written history, that we actually came from another period of our history where we were just as advanced or advanced in a different way. But our current mentality, the way that we look at humanity, our religion even, denies that that's even possible. Why? Well, because it would threaten our current perspective of ourselves being the pinnacle of advanced technology and intelligence. We'd have to admit, oh, maybe we did this before. Maybe we were better at doing this stuff before. Maybe this led somewhere very similar before. And that's the thing I found really funny about Taylor's perspective on there has to be something better than man. The problem isn't man. The problem is what we do with our gifts. The problem is what we do with intelligence. We squander it. We tie it to identity. We tie it to certainty. We tie it to familiarity and thus judgment and fear. And that's the reason our neighbor's children starves. That's the reason we wage war against our brothers. It has nothing to do with being man, because if you look at the apes in this movie, being intelligent apes, they're doing exactly the same thing, but they're trying to restrict it by restricting their technology.
Oh, I don't know if I necessarily caught that restriction of the technology that they're purposefully doing, but it's so funny just, and I know I already said this, but how just straight up replace current humanity with apes, and they just did the same thing. Like, it's just laid out so obviously, and yet I'm sure there's plenty of people who see that and they kind of almost, I don't even know what you would do, like defend the apes for, hey, they don't know necessarily that it's not the case, or they're doing their best, or just like us, we're doing our best. But there's a part where when Taylor's captive and he's asking, just what have I even done? Like, what have I even done wrong? Why am I here? And the only thing he's done is cause them to question what they believe to be the truth. And the thing that they have to do is silence him. It's like Galileo with recognizing that everything doesn't revolve around the earth. Everything revolves around the sun. And they just imprison that dude. And he wasn't pardoned like not that long ago. Like, oh, that's nice of you. That's all that is the response to clinging to certain beliefs, is anyone who causes you to question that, if you're banking on that being the truth, you just got to silence them. It's not even about a conversation. It's not even about rational thought. Because even with that, that's different than our current society, is that Taylor was straight up talking to them in the same voice, the same language as them. And they just were putting a muzzle on him. It's not even like he was doing grunts or barking or using a different tone. He was straight up talking in the same exact language as them. And the cognitive dissonance was still so powerful that they would just close their ears. They would muzzle him. They would just get him to not talk, because that's how fragile any belief is that you hold on to.
And you could see immediately how they could justify it with the simple line, muzzle that animal. They just made him an animal. So therefore he was not an equal, and they didn't have to empathize with him. He was a lesser being. He was inferior, simply by the category that they had given him, which is why at the beginning of the trial, they kept pounding on that. Is this man a man, or is he an ape? Why does that matter? Is he aware? Does he have feelings? Is he alive? Like, That's pretty much the only requirement to treat somebody as you would treat yourself. But when you categorize yourself as superior, then everything else is just not worthy of you. Right. And I thought that was really interesting. Another thing I thought was interesting was the very blatant point they made about academia and the limits of academia, because Cornelius and Zira were both trying to push the boundaries of their fields of studies. In the case of Cornelius, it was with archaeology. And at one point, he is actually warned by Dr. Zaius, don't bury your reputation. And that's why Cornelius is afraid to continue to question things, even though he's the one who knows there is evidence that there's a reason to question everything. It's the fact that it's his future on the line, it's his career on the line, it's his livelihood on the line, not just him, but Zira as well. And how many people in academia are going through that right now? We saw this with COVID, right? If you weren't towing the party line, if you weren't carrying the common fucking narrative, you lost your job. How often does this happen otherwise? There's the theory and ample evidence that the Earth is in fact growing. Not that the continents are moving around willy-nilly, but that at one point they all fit together on a smaller planet, and that it has expanded over time. You can find this video on YouTube. You can find the research behind it. You can find all of that. I encourage you, go look it up. I'm not saying this is the case. What I'm saying to you is, has anybody else ever fucking mentioned that to you? Ever? But it's been around for a long time. And it's just the fact that it would mean a lot of things about our assumptions. It would mean a lot of things about our existence, about our planet, about the nature of energy. It would toss everything up in the air in a way that would make the world very uncomfortable, because we really do rely on that sense of stability. And that stability is very much dependent on our view of ourselves. And so that's what we have to maintain all the time. And I really love how they showed that in this movie. That is exactly what Cornelius and Zira were up against. The status quo being terrified of change.
Yeah, and I can even hear the responses to that recognition of the Earth growing, essentially. Like, you don't know that. It's like, exactly. Neither do you. Neither do you about all of your theories that you're holding on to and banking everything off of. That's the point we're getting across with everything that we're saying, like on the whole podcast. Like, we're not coming with answers. We're coming with recognitions that you don't know either. And you're holding on to something that you don't know is true. And so it's worth continuing to explore. But as we settle upon those things, and then other things get in the way, things like what Cornelius brings up to Zira, is when they're talking, to go off of your point, like, he's hesitant because he talks about their careers on the line, their future, up for a promotion or raise. And it's how often does that happen? How often do we play the political game over what we actually believe in? And that's a component of ego. That's a component of our focus on comfort and wanting things to be better. And how often do we place that above the recognition or exploration of truth? It's so common. It's common even in a basic corporate work environment, like the politics of that. People have things to say, but they don't, because they don't want to shake the tree too much. They want to play the political game as opposed to recognizing what actually may have more lasting impact. They'll just keep playing that little game because it allows them to, rub elbows with their boss or the higher ups, and then that gets them promoted. And we place that above that exploration, and it's such a fucking shame that we do it. But it also at the same time makes sense. Like, that's become the prioritization. We see it with inventions. Like, I can almost guarantee there's a number of things out there that could drastically change society. Drastically change. I've heard, and just theory out there, that there is a cure to cancer out there. It would not surprise me if there was, because there's so much money made off of that. And it's brutal. It is, especially if you have loved ones who have died because of something like that, because of some disease. It's brutal to understand that. But at the same time, there is a lot of money made in that industry. It would not surprise me if there is something like that out there that they are withholding because of all the money being made. And so we see that prioritization so often because the focus is on more for me, because we think our values drive from that. And it all plays hand in hand. But it was just interesting to see that reflected. Cornelius's hesitation was because he's thinking about himself, which is understandable. At the same time, it's like he's got to think about himself, and the risk is, heresy. They're putting under for heresy. Like, their jobs get stripped, they get put in jail. Like, there is a massive risk to doing this. So it's understandable. I don't fault him at all for being hesitant, but it's just an all-encompassing mentality that's being reinforced and continuing to be reinforced. And it has to be someone who takes a stand and looks at it. It's like, wait a second, there's something we're missing here, and comes at it from an approach that isn't as aggressive. Like, it isn't a fight. It's just a simple recognition of a willingness to question and recognize what's fucking made up and just a theory that exists in our head versus what's actually real.
But we have to be willing to be humble to do that. We have to be willing to question ourselves in order to do that. And it's interesting because you bring up the possibility of a cure for cancer. Just one example of this, and this is really going to drive you nuts. I think it's the University of Edmonton a number of years ago ended up finding that there was, in fact, a treatment that was proving to be very effective against cancer almost immediately. And it was using a very common chemical or a very common ingredient that was only pennies to get. And because of that, because it already exists, it can't be patented, which means that they can't make additional money on it. And so nobody wants to pick up the research simply because it wouldn't be a profitable cure, because it can't be patented, because this has been around for years, right? They would have to find some way to modify it so they could make it their own, so they could patent it and then charge us tens of thousands of dollars. And so that's kind of the shame, right? It's just, again, we don't want to question the system. This is the best we could do. And that is what I find the best about this movie, is just the bias, like just how much bias is being played out. I think one of my favorite parts is the quote unquote hearing where Taylor is questioned about his knowledge or his ability to reason. And he's asked things about apes and their preferences and their culture and what they've created, and why are apes the top of the hierarchy and all of this stuff. And he's like, I don't know, like, but I'm talking to you. Like, there's a conversation that's happening here. No, you can't reason. He doesn't think as we do. Now, that's kind of an exaggerated way of showing what we actually do with animals. Animals don't speak English. Oh, they can't reason. They're not intelligent. They don't know all of the things that humans know. It doesn't know it's Tuesday. It's like, right, but all of those things are made up. And the only reason we take them so seriously is because we think they make us superior. In the same way the articles of faith made the apes superior. And we do it all the time. Even the quote unquote self-awareness test of whether or not an animal can recognize a mark that's on its head in a mirror, whether it can recognize it's the mark on its head, that it's actually looking at itself. It's like, oh, that's evidence of self-awareness and intelligence. It is evidence of self-awareness, of the ability to recognize yourself in a mirror. That doesn't mean it's evidence of intelligence, just the intelligence that we happen to identify with because that's how we experience things. All right, which is why we have difficulty understanding animals that don't give a fuck about a mirror. That doesn't mean they're not intelligent. Perhaps they're intelligent enough not to give a fuck about a mirror. Right? But we are biased in how we look at things. And they show that in this movie so many times. And in some ways, it's really funny. Like at the end, when Taylor shaves and Cornelius is like, somehow it makes you look less intelligent. And I find that great just because Cornelius is a hairy motherfucker, right? And he thinks of himself as intelligent, therefore less hair means less intelligent. just by virtue of him being hairy. And it's like that all the time. We do this all the time. We justify ourselves and we are biased in our judgments because of it. And it shapes everything. It puts us in a prison. It restricts all of our culture. It restricts all of our science. It restricts all of our willingness to explore just because we're biased and afraid of questioning that bias.
Yeah, I loved that part when he was saying, he was like, it makes you look less intelligent. It just goes to show how everything we see is a reflection of how we see ourselves. And we must reinforce that based on that belief about ourselves. And with the animal example, looking in the mirror, like the animal is, and that's the fundamental misunderstanding about intelligence, being intelligence versus having intelligence. And if you can't recognize that that is intelligence being expressed, that you are intelligence being expressed at your core, you are life experiencing itself. You're not experiencing life. Life isn't happening to you or for you. It's happening as you, as opposed to something that is separate from you at all. And so an animal looking in the mirror, the whole thing is itself. If it isn't maintaining a conceptual idea of itself, itself is the entirety of its environment, because that is the reality of you. The reality beyond the conceptual idea of yourself is when you look in the mirror, the whole thing you're looking at, whether you're looking in a mirror or not, you're seeing yourself always. And so it's such a silly way to express that intelligence. But another thing I found funny when they were having that court hearing, kind of talking about, and they were starting to get proven that apes on the court, judges or whatever they were starting to kind of realize that they weren't holding up as much, that oh, Taylor actually being able to do all these things does indicate a degree of intelligence, does show he's very similar. They were just like, Zira must have changed your brain. Oh, you must have gone in and allowed you to do it. You were created by Zira. You're like, or basically they were saying he's like a robot. It's funny when they got to that spot of kind of starting to experience some cognitive dissonance, they just said, oh, it must be this. They were like, yeah, it was definitely that. And then they didn't have to look at it anymore because they came up with just a made up theory that popped in their head. And they're like, oh, that's a way to not continue to look at that. And that's what people do. And then you can't reason anymore when they settled upon that. Like as soon as someone settles upon that, a made up belief that they hold on to be the truth, like the conversation kind of ends because you'll just butt up against that because they're holding on to, it's like they put up a wall and you can't really argue it because it becomes like a he said, she said thing, because we believe that things we come up with in our head could possibly be truth, could possibly be real, and they never are. And so that's why that recognition is so important, because anyone can come up with any theory. And if they have enough force and power and a military behind them, they can hold on to that for as long as they want. And there is no way to reason with that mentality. And that's why it's so important to recognize what's real versus what's not.
Now that's really interesting, because I think that's very much the underlying message behind all of this is the question of what is intelligence? What is the cost of intelligence? And how does intelligence in fact change over time? Because if you look at the switch between humans and apes in this movie, the only thing that's really changed is that humans have lost the ability to verbally conceptualize. And so they've lost language, which is divisive in itself, whereas apes have evolved language and the ability to conceptualize, but it's also the reason that now they're more afraid and judgmental and biased. And so, which is more intelligent? And if we are going to be intelligent enough to use concepts and language, if we're not intelligent enough to know that those can be even more divisive when we lose track of that, then we're immediately going to be doomed, which is why the end of the movie is so important. Because Taylor keeps making the point, humans were here before apes and we did it better. And Dr. Zayas says, yeah, where are the humans? What happened to them then? And that's the point, is that our intelligence can, in fact, push the boundaries in every way, shape, and form, But if it isn't done with awareness and empathy and sensitivity for the fact that we are experimenting with a divisive concept all the time, then we're going to get caught in those divisive concepts, and it's going to rip us apart until we have no choice but to destroy ourselves.
And that just points out the importance of the mentality shift. Like it has to be a mentality shift. It can't be an overlaid answer as a product of our current mentality. Or we were talking yesterday on one of our calls about, all of the things that we've come up with, be it capitalism, socialism, communism, all of those types of things. They're all products of the same exact divisive mentality. And as long as you're maintaining your idea that this is the best we can do because the people who are the most powerful are benefiting from that. We don't recognize ourselves in another. As they say early on in the movie, are they still letting their neighbor's kids starve? Because we're not recognizing ourselves in everyone else. And so it just goes to show how the movie ends with realizing, oh, he's been on Earth the whole time. Oh, it's you almost see Dr. Zaius as not so evil anymore. It's just a product of the same mentality, just taking a different form. And that's all it is, because they're treating humans the same way we treat apes. And when you see that, it's like, oh, they've been around. The human, this is where we ended up because the mentality was maintained, or at least the mentality came back and created what they have in this movie, just with apes instead of humans. And so it has to be a mentality shift, because it's just going to keep happening over and over and over and over, building itself up, creating societies, imploding within itself. And I think that's very much what we're seeing right now in society, is we're looking for an answer, a fix to things, without taking a step back, without taking a more zoomed out perspective, without recognizing what's real versus what isn't, what's an illusion versus what's actually real here and now. And we've gotten so lost in believing that an illusion could be the truth, or that an illusion is the truth, that we're not seeing what's actually real. And so that mentality is just going to perpetuate itself no matter what form it takes, whether it's an ape or a human or a fucking giraffe. If the mentality is there, the same outcome is going to continue to happen over and over and over.
Beautifully said. And I think that is an excellent way to wrap up this episode, though I am kind of hoping to see a Planet of Giraffes movie now. I do want to say that the trilogy that recently came out in the last decade or so of the Planet of the Apes is absolutely worth watching. I rip on the 90s version because it was a piece of shit, but they had good intentions. They just tried to put too much into a movie, and they focused too much on the graphics. Anyway, the new trilogy is incredible. It really is. And if you want to watch the new trilogy after watching this version of the original movie, it's absolutely better. You'll actually get more of an idea of how all of this came to be, and it is really well told. But I'm glad you enjoyed this movie. There are also 2 follow-up movies to this one with Charlton Heston, and the third starring Cornelius and Zira, mostly, because it becomes more about them. And there's a whole time paradox involved with the original trilogy that isn't necessarily involved with the new trilogy. So it's definitely worth watching. We may explore it, but I'll wrap up here and pass it to Andrew. This has been fun.
This has been a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check out the rest of the trilogy and the current one, because I don't think I've seen many. The beauty of these movie reviews is most of the things Ray brings up I haven't seen, because I, quite frankly, haven't necessarily seen a ton of movies in my life. So this has been a blast. Yeah, the symbolism is just fucking kind of mind-blowing in this, and how this came out in 1968, and to see it play out over the next 60 years is pretty incredible. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Appreciate everyone for tuning in, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
One last note, though, this is our second Charlton Heston movie, so we may in fact end up doing the 10 Commandments. See you next time, everyone.
Bye, everyone.